At the will reading, my parents laughed while handing my sister $6.9 million. Me? They gave me a single dollar and said, "Go earn your own." My mom smirked, some kids just don't measure up. But when the lawyer read Grandpa's final letter, my mom started screaming. You ever have one of those moments that just shatters your entire world? I'm talking about sitting in a sterile lawyer's office, watching your sister rake in nearly $7 million while you get a single, solitary dollar bill and a cryptic envelope. The shock hit me like a physical blow, a cold, hard knot of betrayal in my gut. But then I saw the glint in my grandfather's attorney's eye, and I knew, in that instant, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of Grandpa Maxwell's final, masterful chess move that would turn my entire family upside down. ***, growing up in our perfectly manicured suburban Boston home, everything looked normal from the outside. But appearances? They were everything to my parents, Richard and Elizabeth. Our house might not have been the biggest, but we always had the latest gadgets, the right brands. It was a carefully curated facade. My sister, Caroline, 3 years my senior, was their golden girl. Beautiful, popular, and most importantly to them, practical. She followed their blueprint flawlessly: prestigious business school, perfect posture, perfect smile, destined to be the perfect executive wife. Every family gathering was a detailed update on Caroline's latest achievement, met with my parents' beaming pride. Then there was me. I was the wild card. From an early age, I was obsessed with science, especially environmental conservation. While Caroline was working country club events, I spent my weekends volunteering at wildlife centers or scrubbing trash off beaches. My passion was met with this thinly veiled disappointment from my mother. Environmental science won't pay for the lifestyle you're accustomed to, Amanda, she'd sigh, waving her manicured hand dismissively. Caroline understands the importance of stability. But there was one person who saw me differently. My grandfather, Maxwell. A retired investment banker with eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Grandpa Maxwell was an anomaly in our status-obsessed family. He'd made a fortune but lived modestly, giving generously to causes he believed in. He wore the same worn leather watch, despite my mother's constant attempts to buy him something more appropriate. The true value of something isn't in its price tag, Mandy, he'd tell me, using the nickname only he was allowed. It's in the purpose it serves. During college summers, while my parents and Caroline were jet-setting across Europe, Grandpa and I would be at his lake house in the Berkshires. We'd sit on his dock, fishing, talking about everything from climate change to philosophy. He never once made me feel like my interests were impractical. The world needs more people who care about its future than its stock market, he'd say. Your passion has purpose, Mandy. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Family dinners, though, were a whole different ballgame. Thanksgiving and Christmas felt less like celebrations and more like dreaded performance reviews. My mother orchestrated everything, from the table settings to the conversations designed solely to highlight Caroline's accomplishments. Caroline just secured a summer internship at Goldman Sachs, she'd announce, serving pie with a triumphant smile. Then, the inevitable pivot to me. Amanda is still exploring her options, she'd say with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. My father, a corporate attorney with a perpetually furrowed brow, would chime in with practical advice that always felt like a criticism. There's no money in saving trees, Amanda. It's time to think about your future realistically. Grandpa Maxwell would catch my eye across the table, sometimes winking, sometimes directly challenging my parents. Not everyone measures success by their bank account, Richard, he once told my father. Some of the richest people I know have never set foot on Wall Street. The tension would thicken. My mother would clear her throat and redirect, but I'd catch Grandpa's subtle nod of encouragement. In those moments, I knew I had at least one ally. When Grandpa was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, the dynamic shifted dramatically. Suddenly, my parents and Caroline were making frequent visits, bringing expensive gifts, offering to manage his affairs. Their concern seemed directly proportional to his substantial net worth. I, on the other hand, simply visited as I always had, bringing homemade soup, reading his favorite mystery novels as he grew weaker. During one of my last visits, 3 months before he passed, he was unusually alert. "Mandy," he said, taking my hand with surprising strength. "Remember that timing is everything in investments and in life." "What do you mean, Grandpa?" I asked. He just smiled cryptically. "Patience is its own reward. The truth always rises to the surface eventually." Then, he changed the subject. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was in the field, collecting water samples, when my mother's voice, formal and businesslike, informed me, "Your grandfather passed this morning. The funeral is being arranged for Friday. Please wear something appropriate. No comfort. No acknowledgement of our bond. Just logistics and appearances." The funeral was precisely what my mother wanted: elegant, restrained, and impressive to the right people. I watched her networking, even in grief, introducing herself to Grandpa's former colleagues. Caroline wore designer black, her makeup flawless, shedding exactly 2 tears during the eulogy. My father spent most of the reception discussing investment strategies with Grandpa's financial advisors. I stood alone by the photo display I'd helped arrange, a collage of Grandpa's life, a young man in the army, holding my mother as a baby, teaching me to fish. A rich life reduced to polite conversation and expensive canapés. A week later, Mr. Peterson, Grandpa's attorney, sent notice about the will reading. My mother immediately went shopping. Caroline canceled client meetings. My father researched estate tax implications. Me? I just wanted closure. A final connection to the man who truly saw me when everyone else looked right through me. I didn't expect much in terms of money. Grandpa's material things weren't important. I hoped for some last words of wisdom, maybe his fishing gear, or a few of the conservation books we'd discussed. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my apartment balcony, looking at the stars, remembering how Grandpa taught me constellations at the lake house. "Some patterns are only visible when you know what to look for," he'd said. I had no idea how prophetic those words would become. The offices of Peterson, Blackwell and Associates were on the top floor of a sleek downtown building, floor-to-ceiling windows showing off Boston's skyline, a subtle reminder of the wealth that flowed through these rooms. The conference room was all imposing mahogany, gleaming under soft light, leather chairs, and law books that looked more decorative than used. My mother, Elizabeth Riley, was, of course, the first to arrive. Never missed an opportunity to be punctual and prepared, especially when money was involved. Her navy Chanel suit probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her ash blonde bob didn't move as she sharply assessed my simple black dress. "You could have made more of an effort, Amanda," she whispered. "This is an important day." My father strode in next, checking his Rolex, a curt nod to Mr. Peterson. Richard Riley always looked like a man calculating costs and benefits, even at his own father-in-law's will reading. His eyes held a distinct gleam of anticipation. Caroline arrived last, making an entrance, her stilettos clicking importantly across the hardwood. She air-kissed my cheeks, her expensive perfume lingering, before taking her seat beside our mother, crossing her legs elegantly, designer handbag perfectly placed in her lap. I sat slightly apart, feeling like an outsider in my own family. The distance wasn't accidental. Mr. Peterson wasn't alone. Harold Winters, Grandpa's best friend of 50 years, sat quietly in a corner. Marta Jimenez, his housekeeper of 20 years, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her grief raw and genuine, unlike the composed faces of my family. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Peterson began, adjusting his glasses. Maxwell was very specific about how this proceeding should unfold. My mother straightened, her smile tightening. "We're all eager to honor his wishes, of course." He unfolded a document. "I'll begin with some smaller bequests before addressing the main estate." The smaller bequests took nearly 30 minutes. Grandpa had left generous amounts to charities, his staff, and friends. Harold got Grandpa's vintage car collection. Marta was given a life estate in the guest house and a sum that made her gasp. My mother's foot tapped with increasing impatience. My father checked his watch twice. Caroline's pleasant expression remained, but her fingers drummed silently against her purse. Now, to the main distributions, Mr. Peterson finally said. To my daughter, Elizabeth, and her husband, Richard, I leave my primary residence in Beacon Hill and my vacation property in Palm Beach. My mother's smile finally became genuine. Millions. To my granddaughter, Caroline Riley, I leave the sum of $6.9 million to be distributed in a trust as outlined in Section 4 of this document. Caroline's intake of breath was audible. She reached for Mother's hand, squeezing it in triumph. My father nodded, satisfied. All eyes turned to me. A strange, hollow feeling formed in my stomach. To my granddaughter, Amanda Grace Riley, Mr. Peterson continued, his voice softening ever so slightly, I leave the sum of $1. The room went silent. I felt the blood drain from my face. I struggled to maintain composure. Additionally, he continued, Amanda is to receive this sealed envelope, to be opened after the conclusion of today's reading. He handed me a thick manila envelope, my name in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. The silence shattered with my mother's short, sharp laugh. Well, that's clarifying, isn't it? She said, not bothering to lower her voice. Always the disappointment. Caroline, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable, though the gleam of triumph never quite left her eyes. I'm sure Grandpa had his reasons, she said, her tone suggesting those reasons were my own failings. My father simply shook his head, a dismissive gesture as effective as his words often were. I clutched the envelope, fighting the urge to bolt from the room, to escape the pity in Harold's eyes, the confusion on Marta's face, and the barely concealed satisfaction on my family's. Pride kept me in my seat. Whatever Grandpa's reasons, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Is that all? My mother asked, already gathering her purse, ready to celebrate Caroline's windfall. Actually, no, Mr. Peterson said. Maxwell prepared a video to be played after the initial reading. He was most insistent about everyone remaining present for it. My father's annoyance was palpable. Is that really necessary? We all have commitments. It is a condition of the will, Mr. Peterson stated firmly. All beneficiaries must be present for the entire proceeding or risk forfeiture. That settled it. No matter how dismissive they were of me, my family would sit through hours of content before risking their newfound wealth. Mr. Peterson dimmed the lights and a screen descended. After a moment of static, Grandpa's face appeared. He looked frail, the cancer having taken its toll, but his eyes were still sharp, alert, the eyes of a man who saw what others missed. None of us were prepared for what came next. If you're watching this, Grandpa began, his voice stronger on video than it had been in his final weeks, then I've moved on to whatever comes next. And you're all sitting in Peterson's uncomfortable conference chairs, wondering what this old man has up his sleeve. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. I recognized that expression. It was the same one he wore when he was about to win at chess, a game he taught me during rainy afternoons at the lake house. He addressed Harold and Marta first, heartfelt words of thanks and generous gifts. Harold nodded silently, a tear tracking down his cheek. Marta whispered something in Spanish, pressing a tissue to her lips. Then, Grandpa shifted, his expression subtly changing as he addressed my parents. Elizabeth, my only daughter. You were always ambitious, even as a little girl. I remember how determined you were to have the biggest dollhouse, the prettiest dresses. Richard, you and I have had our differences over the years, but I never doubted your dedication to the lifestyle you chose. My mother's smile faltered. There was something in his tone, not quite criticism, but certainly not the warm praise she'd expected. To Caroline, congratulations on your inheritance. You've always understood the value of money and appearances. I've structured your trust with quarterly distributions to ensure it provides for you over time. Use it wisely. Caroline's expression flickered between satisfaction and uncertainty. Grandpa's words seemed double-edged, and I wasn't the only one who noticed. Then, Grandpa looked directly into the camera, and I had the uncanny feeling he was looking right at me. Amanda, my Mandy, you see what others miss. You always have, from the time you were small and noticed the bird's nest in the oak tree that everyone else walked past. Remember what I told you about timing and patience. True wealth isn't measured in dollars. My throat tightened. Even from beyond, he saw me. Grandpa's expression became serious. Now, to the matter at hand. My will may seem straightforward, perhaps even unfair to some of you. But there's more to this story, as there usually is in life. He leaned forward. I've arranged a series of tasks that must be completed before the full terms of my estate can be implemented. Consider it my final lesson to all of you. Mr. Peterson has been instructed to provide sealed letters with specific opening dates and instructions. All conditions must be followed exactly as written. Any attempt to contest this will or circumvent the process will result in the entirety of my estate, every property, investment, and penny, being immediately transferred to the Maxwell Riley Foundation for Environmental Conservation. My mother's sharp intake of breath was audible. My father's face darkened. Caroline's perfect posture stiffened. The first step begins today. Amanda, the envelope you've received contains the key to my lake house and instructions for the first task. I suggest you go there immediately. Grandpa's eyes twinkled with that familiar mischievous light I'd loved since childhood. And remember, things aren't always as they appear. Sometimes a single dollar can be worth more than millions. The screen went black. The lights came up. All eyes were on me and the envelope in my hands. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. That concludes today's official reading. As stated, any attempts to contest the will or interfere with the process Mr. Riley has established will trigger the charitable remainder clause. My mother recovered first, her social mask sliding back into place. Well, that was certainly dramatic, she said with a forced laugh. Amanda will naturally accompany you to the lake house. Family support and all that. The sudden shift from dismissal to family support wasn't lost on me. An hour ago, I was a disappointment. Now, I was their access point to whatever game Grandpa had set up. I don't think that's necessary, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Don't be ridiculous, my father cut in. This clearly affects all of us. We'll drive up together tomorrow morning. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I stood my ground against his authoritative tone. No. Grandpa addressed the envelope to me, and I'll go alone. The will was clear about following his instructions exactly. Amanda, my mother hissed, her composure slipping. This is not the time for your usual stubbornness. Actually, Mr. Peterson interjected. The instructions are quite specific that Amanda must be the one to open the lake house and retrieve the next communication. Others may visit subsequently, but the initial task is hers alone. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but the threat of the charitable remainder clause was enough to silence further protests. As we gathered our things, Caroline approached me in the hallway, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain. I could drive up with you tomorrow, she offered, her voice lowered so our parents couldn't hear. Just for support. This is all very strange. I studied her face, trying to discern her true motivation. Was this genuine concern, or was she just ensuring her access to the next phase of Grandpa's plan? I need to do this alone first, I said finally. But I'll call you after. She nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across her features before her composed smile returned. Of course, just keep us in the loop, okay? As I walked to my car, clutching the unopened envelope, I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandpa's final game had only just begun. And for once, I wasn't just a pawn on someone else's board. The 2-hour drive to the Berkshires gave me time to think. I waited until I was well outside Boston before pulling over at a rest stop to open Grandpa's envelope. Inside was the promised key, attached to the familiar fish-shaped keychain I'd given him for his 70th birthday. There was also a letter in his distinctive slanted handwriting. "Mandy," it began. "If you're reading this, then the first phase is complete. Go to the lake house alone. In my study, you'll find the answers to questions you haven't thought to ask yet. Remember our chess games. The first move is never the most important one. It's the setup that matters. Trust yourself. Love, Grandpa." Cryptic as ever, even from beyond. I smiled despite myself and continued driving, memories flooding back with each familiar turn in the road. The lake house came into view just as the afternoon sun hit the water, creating those diamonds of light that had fascinated me since childhood. The modest A-frame cabin, with its wide deck overlooking the water, was exactly as I remembered, though perhaps a bit more weathered. Grandpa had refused my mother's repeated suggestions to update or expand the property. "Some things are perfect just as they are," he'd always said. I parked and reached for my overnight bag when another car pulled up behind me. Then another. My heart sank as I recognized my parents' Mercedes and Caroline's BMW. "Surprise!" Caroline called out, too brightly, emerging from her car. "We thought we'd join you after all. Family adventure." My mother didn't bother with pretense. "We're not letting you handle this alone, Amanda. There's clearly something significant happening, and we all have a stake in the outcome." The will specified that I should come alone, I reminded them, anger building inside me. "For the initial entry only," my father countered smoothly. Peterson confirmed we could join afterward. "And look, you've arrived first. You'll enter first. We're just here to support the process." Support the process, not support me, the distinction was clear. Rather than argue further, I turned and walked to the front door. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click, and the door swung open on slightly creaky hinges. The scent of pine and old books, Grandpa's scent, greeted me, and for a moment, I stood frozen, half expecting to hear his voice. The house was exactly as he'd left it, though a fine layer of dust covered the surfaces. Fishing rods still leaned in the corner. His reading glasses sat on the side table next to his favorite armchair, a bookmark still protruding from the mystery novel he'd been reading. My family pushed in behind me, their designer shoes clicking on the hardwood floors. The sound was jarringly out of place in this sanctuary of simplicity. "God, it's stuffy in here," my mother complained, moving immediately to open windows. "I've always said this place needs a proper renovation." My father was already assessing, his eyes cataloging items of potential value. "The property itself is the real asset. Lakefront in this area goes for a premium now." Caroline moved to the mantel, picking up framed photos, studying them with newfound interest. "I forgot how many pictures of you he had here," she said, her tone difficult to read. I ignored them all and moved toward the hallway that led to Grandpa's study. This door had always been kept locked when we visited as children. Not out of secrecy, but respect, he'd explained. Everyone needs a space that's entirely their own. The fish keychain held a second, smaller key that fit this lock perfectly. I felt my family hovering behind me as the door swung open. The study was smaller than I remembered from my few childhood glimpses. Walls of bookshelves surrounded a simple oak desk positioned to look out over the lake. Maps were pinned to a corkboard. Filing cabinets lined one wall, and a worn leather chair sat waiting, as if Grandpa had just stepped out momentarily. "Start looking for anything valuable," my father instructed, moving immediately to the filing cabinets. "Investment records, property deeds. Anything that might explain what's happening." "Richard," my mother scolded, though her own eyes were scanning the room calculatingly. "Show some respect. Maxwell was her father-in-law, after all." I approached the desk slowly, drawn to a framed photo I'd never seen before. It showed a much younger Grandpa standing proudly in front of a small office building. The sign read, "Riley Innovations." Something tickled at my memory, but before I could grasp it, Caroline was beside me. "What's that?" she asked, reaching for the photo. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never seen it before." My father glanced over. "Riley Innovations. Never heard of it." Something in his tone made me look up sharply, but his expression gave nothing away as he returned to rifling through files. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers, followed by a question. "Where did it all begin?" "It's a puzzle," I murmured, studying the numbers. They looked like dates followed by dollar amounts. The earliest was from 1975, $2,975. That number resonated with something Grandpa had once told me about his first investment. While my family continued their chaotic search, I sat in Grandpa's chair and opened the desk drawer. Inside was a leather-bound book with first steps embossed on the cover. When I opened it, I found records of Grandpa's earliest investments, including the $2,975 he'd invested in a small technology company in 1975, his first major success. "What did you find?" My mother appeared instantly at my shoulder. "Just Grandpa's old investment diary," I said, continuing to page through it. The final entry caught my eye, a note that seemed out of place among the financial records. "The truth is in the foundation. Remember to look beneath the surface." As I pondered this, my attention was drawn to a small, decorative chestnut that had always sat on Grandpa's desk. On impulse, I picked it up. The bottom felt loose. When I twisted it, the base came away, revealing a tiny compartment containing a small key and a folded note. "What's that?" Caroline asked, suddenly beside me again. "I'm not sure," I said truthfully, unfolding the note. Second letter in the floor safe. Combination, date of betrayal. My father had found an old photo album and was flipping through it impatiently. "Nothing but sentimental nonsense," he muttered, tossing it aside carelessly. Several photos slipped out, scattering across the floor. "Richard," my mother snapped, but she wasn't concerned about the photos. She was pulling pages from the album, examining them closely before discarding those that didn't interest her. There must be some record of his investments here. I knelt to gather the fallen photos, noticing they were mostly of Grandpa with my mother as a child, and later with me. One caught my attention, a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Local Entrepreneur Sells Patent for Millions." Grandpa stood, shaking hands with another man, both smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Maxwell Riley sells innovative circuit designed to Wilson Technologies." "Mom," I said slowly. "Did Grandpa own a company called Riley Innovations?" Her hands froze in their destructive sorting. "That was before your time," she dismissed, "a small venture that didn't amount to much." But her voice had an edge. I recognized the same tone she used when covering up something uncomfortable at dinner parties. Meanwhile, I was examining the floor, looking for any sign of a safe. In the corner, partially hidden by a small rug, I noticed a seam in the hardwood. Pulling back the rug revealed a floor safe. Its dial waited for the combination. "Date of betrayal," I murmured to myself. What did that mean? My father was on his phone, speaking in low tones about property values and development potential. Caroline was opening and closing books on the shelves, checking for hidden contents. I stared at the newspaper clipping again, noting the date, June 17, 1995. Something clicked in my mind. I entered the numbers 6-1-7-9-5 into the safe's combination dial. With a satisfying click, the door released. Inside was another envelope, thicker than the first, and a small leather notebook with a rubber band around it. Before anyone could reach it, I grabbed both items and stood up. "What did you find?" My father was suddenly focused entirely on me, his phone call forgotten. "Another letter from Grandpa," I said, holding the envelope close. "And a notebook." "Well, open it," my mother demanded, her composure slipping further. "This treasure hunt has gone on long enough." "I think I'm supposed to read it privately first," I said, thinking quickly. "That's absurd," my father cut in. This concerns all of us. Whatever game our grandfather is playing affects the entire family. The will was clear about following his instructions exactly, I reminded them, echoing Mr. Peterson's earlier warning. I'm not risking the charitable remainder clause because you're impatient. My mother's eyes narrowed dangerously. Amanda Grace Riley, you'll show us that letter immediately. We are your parents and this is a family matter. Something in me snapped. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, and criticized crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity and resolve. No, I said simply. Grandpa addressed this to me. I'll read it first and share what's appropriate afterward. My father took a step toward me, his face darkening. You ungrateful little, stop it, Dad. Caroline interrupted suddenly. My parents turned to her in surprise. Caroline never contradicted them. She shrugged, her expression unreadable. I have 6.9 million reasons to make sure we follow the rules exactly. Let Amanda read the letter first. It wasn't support, exactly, but it was something. I seized the moment to move toward the door. I'm going to read this in private. I'll let you know if there's anything you need to know. This is ridiculous, my mother fumed. What could possibly be so secret? I guess we'll find out, I replied, walking out of the study with more confidence than I felt. As I headed for the front door, Caroline followed me into the hallway. Amanda, wait, she said, her voice unusually hesitant. There's something you should know. I paused, studying my sister's face. For once, her perfect mask had slipped, revealing genuine conflict underneath. What is it? She glanced back toward the study, ensuring our parents couldn't hear. Things aren't great with Mom and Dad financially. Dad's firm lost some major clients last year. They've been living on credit and appearances. They're counting on this inheritance. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, given our family's obsession with status, but it did. Why are you telling me this? Caroline's smile was bitter. Maybe I'm tired of the act, too. Just be careful. They're desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. Before I could respond, we heard our parents emerging from the study. I hurried out the front door, letter and notebook clutched tightly against my chest. I needed space to think, to understand what Grandpa was trying to show me. This isn't over, Amanda, my father called after me. You can't keep family matters to yourself. I kept walking, not looking back. For the first time, I was beginning to understand that family matters might have a double meaning in the story Grandpa was unfolding. I drove into town and checked into the small inn where Grandpa and I used to have lunch after our fishing trips. Martha, the innkeeper, recognized me immediately. Amanda, it's been too long, she said warmly. I was so sorry to hear about Maxwell. He was one of the good ones. Thanks, Martha. I miss him. Are you staying at the lake house? She asked, handing me a room key. Not tonight. Too many memories, I said, not mentioning the family invasion. And I need some quiet to go through some of Grandpa's papers. She nodded understandingly. Room 8 has the best view of the mountains. Maxwell always said it helped him think. Once settled in the cozy room, I spread the contents of the envelope on the bed. There was another letter from Grandpa, but also several legal documents and old newspaper clippings. I opened the notebook first. What I found inside stunned me. It was a detailed record of Grandpa's true financial holdings, far more extensive than what had been revealed in the will. Properties across 3 continents, investment portfolios, patents, and business interests totaling well over $24 million. The $1 I'd inherited seemed even more symbolic in comparison. I turned to Grandpa's letter next, my hands trembling slightly. Mandy, it began. If you're reading this, you've taken the first step in understanding why things are as they are. The notebook contains the truth about my estate, far more substantial than what was revealed at the reading. But money is just money. What matters is the truth behind it. Your next task is to investigate Riley Innovations. The company's records are held by Peterson in a separate file. Call him and he'll provide access. Once you understand what happened there, you'll know why I've structured things this way. Be careful, Mandy. The people closest to us can sometimes be the ones we know least. Trust your instincts. They've always been good. Love, Grandpa. I immediately called Mr. Peterson, who wasn't surprised to hear from me. Maxwell anticipated your call around this time, he said. I have the Riley Innovations files ready. I can send them securely to your email now. Within minutes, my laptop pinged with dozens of scanned documents. As I read through them, the story of Riley Innovations emerged, and with it, a disturbing revelation about my family. Grandpa had founded Riley Innovations in the early 1990s, developing a revolutionary circuit design that promised to transform computing efficiency. The company was small but growing, with several patents pending. Then, in 1995, he suddenly sold everything to Wilson Technologies for a fraction of its worth. The timing struck me as odd. Why would a savvy businessman like my grandfather sell a promising company for less than its value? I dug deeper into the files. There it was, a memo from Richard Riley, my father, who had been handling some legal work for the company. He had apparently advised Grandpa that a competing patent would render their technology worthless, recommending an immediate sale. 6 months later, Wilson Technologies had used Grandpa's design to launch their most successful product line ever, making billions. No competing patent had ever emerged. And the most damning detail? My mother had been working at Wilson Technologies in their acquisitions department at the time. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. My parents had orchestrated the sale of Grandpa's company, presumably receiving compensation from Wilson that wasn't reflected in the official sale. They had betrayed him for financial gain. I sat back, stunned. Was this what Grandpa had meant by his greatest disappointment? A memory surfaced, Grandpa telling me years ago about making a mistake and trusting the wrong people. Sometimes those closest to you can be blind to your best interests, he'd said. I thought he was talking about business associates, not family. The next morning, I called Mr. Peterson again. I found the Riley Innovations documents, I said. Did my grandfather know about my parents' involvement? He discovered the truth about 5 years ago, Peterson confirmed. An old colleague from Wilson came clean about the backdoor dealings. Maxwell was devastated isn't a strong enough word, but he was also strategic. He wanted proof before confronting anyone. And did he get it? Yes. Everything is documented in the files I sent you. There's more, Amanda. Your grandfather restructured his entire estate plan after learning the truth. What you saw at the reading was just the surface. I spent the day reviewing everything, my shock gradually giving way to burning anger. By evening, I was ready. I drove back to the lake house, knowing my family would still be there. They were sitting on the deck, drinking wine and discussing development potential for the property when I arrived. Their conversation halted abruptly when they saw my face. Amanda, my mother began with false brightness. We were just discussing how to profit from Grandpa's home, I finished for her. Or were you reminiscing about Riley Innovations and how successfully you engineered its sale? The wineglass nearly slipped from my mother's hand. My father's face hardened into the expression he used in tough negotiations. I don't know what you think you've discovered, he said carefully, but business decisions from 30 years ago are hardly relevant now. Fraud is always relevant, Dad. So is betrayal. I placed copies of the most damning documents on the table between us. My mother's memo to Wilson's CEO outlining Grandpa's vulnerabilities. My father's falsified legal opinion. The backdated consulting agreement that had paid them nearly $500,000 after the sale went through. Where did you get these? My father demanded, his voice dangerous. Grandpa had copies all along, I said. He knew what you did. Both of you. My mother recovered quickly, her social mask sliding back into place. You're blowing ancient history out of proportion. Business is complicated, Amanda. Your grandfather did very well from that sale. He was robbed of millions, I countered, by his own daughter and son-in-law. Caroline had been unusually quiet, staring at the documents with growing horror. Is this true? She finally asked our parents. Did you really do this? Of course not, our mother snapped. Amanda is being dramatic as usual. But something had shifted in Caroline's expression. She turned to me. This is what Grandpa's game is about, isn't it? He's making things right. Before I could answer, a courier arrived at the door with a special delivery envelope addressed to me. Mr. Peterson said to deliver this exactly at 7 p.m., the young man explained. Inside was a third letter from Grandpa with a handwritten note from Peterson, to be opened when the truth is laid bare. My hands shook as I broke the seal, aware of my family watching intently. I read the letter aloud, my voice growing stronger with each word. My dear family, if this letter is being read, then Amanda has discovered the truth about Riley. Innovations. The betrayal I experienced at the hands of those I trusted most was the greatest disappointment of my life. But it taught me to look more closely at character, at who people truly are beneath the appearances they maintain. The will reading you attended was part of a test, one final assessment of character. The true disposition of my estate depends entirely on how each of you has behaved during this process. Everything has been observed and documented. Mr. Peterson has been instructed to arrive at the lake house at this time with a notary and witnesses to document the final phase of my estate plan. The choice of who truly inherits now depends on what has been revealed about each of you. As if on cue, Mr. Peterson's car pulled up outside, followed by two others. My mother stood up abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. This is ridiculous. A person can't control from the grave. We'll contest this entire charade. I wouldn't advise that, said Mr. Peterson, entering with his associates. Maxwell anticipated every possible legal challenge. Contesting will only ensure everything goes to charity, as stipulated. He added, besides, you might want to see this first. He opened his laptop and played a video. It showed my parents searching Grandpa's study the previous day, my mother tearing pages from photo albums, my father making calls about developing the property before Grandpa was even properly buried. The lake house has been equipped with recording devices for the past week, Peterson explained. Maxwell wanted to see true colors, not performances. My mother's scream could probably be heard across the lake. You had no right. This is invasion of privacy. My father lunged for the laptop, but one of Peterson's associates blocked him. Richard Riley, I'd advise against any rash actions. There are legal consequences to destroying evidence. Evidence of what? Caroline asked, her voice small. Mr. Peterson turned to her. Evidence of character, Miss Riley. And potentially evidence related to the fraud committed against Maxwell regarding Riley Innovations. He turned to me. Amanda, your grandfather left instructions that you should be the one to make the final decision once all facts were known. What decision? I asked, confused. Whether to pursue legal action against your parents for their fraud, which would likely result in criminal charges given the evidence, or to implement the alternative inheritance plan he designed. My father's face had turned ashen. You wouldn't, he said to me. We're your parents. Parents who called me a disappointment my entire life, I replied, a lifetime of hurt surfacing at once. Who dismissed my dreams? Who valued appearances over truth? Who betrayed their own father for money? What's the alternative plan? Caroline asked quietly. Peterson handed me another document. Maxwell restructured his estate to place the majority of his true fortune, approximately $24 million, plus the intellectual property rights that should have made him a billionaire, into a trust. Amanda would control this trust, with ethical oversight provisions. My mother made a strangled sound. My father seemed to age 10 years in an instant. The properties already distributed would remain with their recipients, Peterson continued. But the trust would control all liquid assets and business interests. So Amanda gets everything after all we've done for this family? My mother's voice took on a hysterical edge. What exactly have you done for this family, Mom? I asked quietly. Lie? Manipulate? Betray? You ungrateful little, she began, but Caroline cut her off. Stop it, Mom. Just stop. My sister's voice was tired, but resolute. It's over. We've lost. My father tried a different approach. Amanda, sweetheart, you have to understand. Business decisions are complicated. We never meant to hurt anyone. We can explain everything. But the time for their explanations had passed. The documents spoke for themselves. The recording showed who they really were. Mr. Peterson, I said finally. I need time to think about this. Can we reconvene tomorrow? He nodded understandingly. Of course. Maxwell left one final message for this moment. Would you like to hear it? At my nod, he played a short audio clip of Grandpa's voice. Forgiveness is optional, Mandy. Wisdom is mandatory. Whatever you decide, do it with clarity and purpose, not emotion. My parents and Caroline left shortly after, my mother in tears, my father in stony silence. Caroline paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For what it's worth, she said softly, I didn't know about Riley Innovations, but I've known things weren't right for a long time and said nothing. I'm not much better than they are. After everyone had gone, I sat alone in Grandpa's study, looking out at the lake as the sun set. On the desk was a photo I hadn't noticed before, Grandpa and me on this very dock, fishing rods in hand, both of us laughing. He had written on the back, "True wealth is measured in moments like these." For the first time since his death, I cried freely, mourning not just him, but the family I had never truly had. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the lake a perfect mirror of the blue sky. I had barely slept, weighing options and consequences, trying to separate justice from vengeance, healing from harm. By sunrise, I knew what I needed to do. I called Mr. Peterson and asked him to arrange a meeting at the lake house. Everyone should be there, I said. My parents, Caroline, you and your witnesses, and Harold, too. It's time to finish this. By noon, they had all gathered in the living room. My parents sat rigidly on the sofa, both dressed immaculately, as if appearance could somehow save them. Caroline had chosen a seat slightly apart from them, her expression troubled but resolute. Harold sat by the window, his weathered face compassionate. Mr. Peterson and his associates maintained professional neutrality. I stood by the fireplace, Grandpa's final letter in my hands. I had found it that morning in his desk drawer, marked for Amanda, when all is revealed. Thank you all for coming, I began, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Yesterday, we learned some difficult truths about our family. Today, we'll decide how to move forward. My father started to speak, but I held up my hand. Please let me finish. I've spent the night thinking about what Grandpa was trying to teach us with this elaborate plan. It wasn't about punishment or even justice, though those elements exist. It was about truth and consequences. I opened the letter and read aloud, Mandy, by now you understand why I structured things this way. The final decision is yours, but remember that whatever path you choose will shape not just your future, but who you become. Money can be a tool for good or a weapon for harm. Use it wisely. The truth has been revealed. What matters now is what you all do with it. I looked up at my family. Grandpa's master plan wasn't just about exposing the past. It was a test. One final opportunity to show who we really are when faced with uncomfortable truths. Mr. Peterson nodded. Maxwell was quite specific about this. The distribution of his true estate would be determined by how each of you behave during this process. Everything has been documented, not just the past fraud, but your actions over the past week. He opened a folder. The video evidence from the lake house and other documentation shows a clear pattern of behavior. He turned to my parents. Mr. and Mrs. Riley, your actions demonstrated continued dishonesty, destruction of personal property, and planning to profit from assets before they were legally yours. My mother's face flushed with anger, but my father placed a restraining hand on her arm. Caroline, Peterson continued, your behavior was mixed. You initially aligned with your parents, but showed moments of independence and honesty, particularly yesterday. Caroline nodded slightly, her eyes downcast. Amanda, he said, turning to me. You followed your grandfather's instructions exactly, sought truth rather than advantage, and showed restraint when discoveries were made. As he spoke, two more people entered the room, a notary, and Mr. Jacobs, who I recognized as the security expert who had installed Grandpa's home systems. Mr. Jacobs has compiled all video and audio recordings as instructed, Peterson explained. They've been secured as evidence should legal proceedings become necessary. At those words, my mother could contain herself no longer. This is absurd. You can't possibly use secret recordings against us. We'll sue for invasion of privacy. The lake house belongs to the estate, Peterson replied calmly. Maxwell had every legal right to monitor his property. Additionally, there were disclosure notices posted, though you may not have noticed them. This is a witch hunt, my father declared, attempting to regain control. Ancient business dealings being weaponized by a bitter old man. Is that what you think this is about, Richard? Harold spoke up for the first time. Maxwell wasn't bitter. He was heartbroken. He trusted you both. Welcomed you as family. The money wasn't what hurt him. It was the betrayal. You have no idea what you're talking about. My mother snapped. Actually, I do, Harold replied quietly. I was there when he discovered the truth. He aged 10 years that day. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. The evidence regarding Riley Innovations has been reviewed by our legal team. There are clear indications of fraud, insider trading, and breach of fiduciary duty. The statute of limitations has expired on some aspects, but not all. My father paled visibly. What are you saying? I'm saying, Peterson replied, that should Amanda choose to pursue this matter legally, there would likely be both civil and criminal consequences. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. That's what this is about, isn't it? My mother said, her voice suddenly pleading. You want revenge. You've always been jealous of Caroline, resentful of our expectations. Now you have your chance to punish us. This isn't about revenge, Mom, I said quietly. It's about truth and choices. What does that mean? Caroline asked. I took a deep breath. It means I've made my decision about Grandpa's estate and the evidence of fraud. Mr. Peterson handed me a document. This details the two options Maxwell outlined. You may sign where indicated to implement your choice. My parents watched with thinly veiled panic as I reviewed the paper. Caroline's expression was resigned but calm. I choose option 2, I said finally, signing the document and handing it back to Peterson. What does that mean? My father demanded. Peterson reviewed the signed document and nodded. It means that Amanda has chosen not to pursue criminal charges regarding the Riley Innovations fraud. My mother sagged with visible relief. However, he continued, the restructured inheritance plan will be implemented as Maxwell designed. The primary control of the true estate, valued at approximately $24 million, will be placed in a trust overseen by Amanda. The properties already distributed will remain with their recipients, but all other assets will be managed through the trust with specific ethical guidelines and oversight. So, she still gets everything? My mother said bitterly. Not exactly, I interjected. The trust isn't structured for personal enrichment. It's designed to fund environmental conservation efforts, educational opportunities, and ethical business investments. I'll oversee it, but with fiduciary responsibilities and an oversight board. And what about us? My father asked, his voice hollow. You keep the properties you've been given, which are substantial, but the cash distributions will be contingent on certain conditions. What conditions? Caroline asked. I met her eyes directly. Honesty. A family counseling process to address the patterns that brought us here. And for Mom and Dad, community service hours with environmental organizations. My mother laughed incredulously. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, I replied. This isn't punishment, Mom. It's an opportunity to rebuild on a foundation of truth instead of appearances. And if we refuse, my father challenged. Then the trust document stipulates that your portion will be redirected to the Maxwell Riley Foundation, Peterson answered. It's your choice. My father stood abruptly. This is emotional blackmail. We won't be part of it, Dad, Caroline said suddenly. Stop. Just stop. She turned to me. I accept the conditions. All of them. My parents stared at her in shock. Caroline, you can't mean that. My mother gasped. I do, Mom. I've been part of the problem too long. I knew things weren't right, but went along because it was easier. I'm done with that. A heavy silence fell over the room. Is this your final decision? Peterson asked me formally. I nodded. Yes. No criminal charges, but the trust implemented as Grandpa designed, with the conditions I've outlined. Very well. I'll file the necessary paperwork immediately. Mr. and Mrs. Riley, you have 48 hours to accept or decline the conditions of your continued distributions. My father's face was stone. We'll need to consult our attorney. Of course, Peterson replied, though I should mention that Maxwell anticipated that response as well. The trust document includes a provision for legal challenges that would not work in your favor. As Peterson and his associates packed up their materials, my parents remained frozen on the sofa, the wreckage of their carefully constructed facade scattered around them. Elizabeth, Richard, Harold said gently. Maxwell didn't do this out of cruelty. He believed people could change if given the right motivation. Even at the end, he hoped you would. My mother turned away, but not before I caught the flash of something genuine in her eyes. Perhaps the first real emotion I'd seen from her in years. One by one, everyone left until only Caroline and I remained in the living room. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor as we sat in silence, the weight of the day's revelations settling around us. What happens now? She finally asked. I don't know exactly, I admitted. But for the first time, whatever happens will be based on truth, not illusions. She nodded slowly. I really didn't know about Riley Innovations, Amanda. But I knew something wasn't right with Mom and Dad. I've always known. Why? Didn't you ever say anything? Her laugh was sad. Same reason you spent years trying to please them despite the constant criticism. They're parents, and I was getting the benefits of being the favorite. She looked out at the lake. Grandpa liked you better, though. I was always jealous of that. He didn't like me better, I said. He saw me clearly. There's a difference. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, I found Grandpa's final message, a handwritten note tucked into his favorite book on the shelf. It read, simply, "The truth will set you free. But first, it will make you very uncomfortable. Worth it every time. Love you, Mandy." Standing on the dock where we had spent so many hours together, I finally understood what he had been trying to teach me all along. True wealth wasn't in bank accounts or properties. It was in the courage to see clearly, to speak truth, and to remain true to yourself, even when it would be easier to look away. 6 months passed like a dream and a lifetime all at once. The lake house had transformed from a simple cabin into the headquarters of the Maxwell Riley Foundation for Environmental Innovation. The main house remained largely unchanged, a testament to Grandpa's simple tastes and my desire to honor his memory. But the boathouse had been converted into a state-of-the-art research lab where scientists studied sustainable technologies. I stood on the dock, watching the morning mist rise off the water, remembering how Grandpa and I used to count fish jumping before breakfast. So much had changed. Yet in the quietest moments, he still felt present. The foundation was flourishing beyond my wildest expectations. We had already funded 3 major conservation projects and established scholarships for students pursuing environmental science degrees. The Trust's ethical investment arm was backing promising startups focused on renewable energy and sustainable agriculture. The journey hadn't been smooth. The first months after the revelation were brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. Despite my decision not to pursue criminal charges, the emotional fallout was severe. I found myself alternating between righteous anger and crushing doubt. Had I done the right thing? Was I honoring Grandpa's legacy or somehow betraying it by not seeking full justice? Weekly therapy sessions became my lifeline. Dr. Marshall helped me navigate the complex grief I was experiencing, not just for Grandpa, but for the family I had thought I had, for the parents I had spent a lifetime trying to please. Grief isn't linear, she reminded me, and it's especially complicated when it's entwined with betrayal and years of emotional manipulation. Be patient with yourself. My parents had reacted exactly as I'd expected. After consulting multiple attorneys and discovering that Grandpa had indeed created an ironclad trust document, they reluctantly agreed to the conditions I had set. The community service requirement was particularly galling to my mother, who complained bitterly about digging in dirt with common volunteers at the urban garden project. But something unexpected happened around the 3-month mark. My father called me, his voice lacking its usual authoritative edge. "The watershed restoration project," he said awkwardly. "It's actually interesting." The engineer explained how the natural filtration system works. "It's quite ingenious, really." It wasn't an apology, or even an acknowledgement of past wrongs, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall of denial and self-justification. My mother took longer. Her participation in the required family counseling sessions was initially performative at best, hostile at worst. She sat rigid and defensive, deflecting any suggestion that her actions had been harmful. "We gave you girls everything," she insisted during one session. "The best schools, nice clothes, family vacations. How dare you judge us for a business decision made before you were even born?" The breakthrough came unexpectedly during a session when the therapist asked us each to bring a meaningful photograph. I brought the picture of Grandpa and me fishing. Caroline brought a candid shot of the 4 of us at her college graduation. My father chose a formal family portrait from when we were teenagers. My mother brought nothing, claiming to have forgotten the assignment. But at the end of the session, as we were gathering our things, she pulled a creased photograph from her wallet and placed it silently on the table. It showed her as a young girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders at what appeared to be a county fair. Both were laughing, her small hands gripping his forehead, his larger one securing her legs. "He taught me to be brave," she said quietly, not meeting our eyes. "To climb higher than seemed safe." I don't know when I forgot that. It wasn't a full reconciliation. I doubted we would ever have the warm, supportive relationship depicted in holiday commercials, but it was a moment of genuine emotion, a glimpse of the person beneath the perfect facade. Caroline's journey surprised me most of all. Initially furious about the conditions attached to her inheritance, she had threatened to contest the will, to side with our parents. But something shifted during the revelation at the lake house. 2 weeks after the final meeting, she showed up at my apartment unannounced, eyes red from crying. "I've been thinking about Grandpa," she said without preamble, about how he always asked me real questions, not about my grades or achievements, but about what I thought about things. I never gave him real answers. I just said what I thought would sound impressive. She twisted her hands in her lap. I don't think I know who I am without the act, Amanda. I've been playing a role for so long. That conversation marked the beginning of a fragile new relationship between us. Caroline reduced her hours at the investment firm and began volunteering with one of the Foundation's urban education initiatives. To everyone's surprise, including her own, she discovered a genuine talent for teaching financial literacy to high school students. We weren't best friends overnight, but we were building something authentic for perhaps the first time. Coffee once a week became a tradition. Sometimes awkward, sometimes tearful, but always honest. My personal life had transformed as well. The Foundation work introduced me to a network of passionate environmentalists and researchers who valued substance over style. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen and appreciated for my mind and contributions, rather than being measured against impossible standards. I developed a close friendship with Dr. Eliza Kaminsky, the marine biologist heading our watershed project. Her brilliant mind and dry humor made long research days fly by. When she invited me to co-author a paper on our findings, I experienced a professional confidence I'd never known before. There was also Mark, the Foundation's legal advisor, whose kind eyes and thoughtful questions had gradually evolved our professional relationship into something more personal. He understood the complexity of my family situation without judgment, offering support without trying to fix everything. Our third date had been a stargazing picnic at the lake house, his idea after I mentioned Grandpa teaching me constellations. Perhaps most meaningful was the mentorship program I'd established for young girls interested in environmental science. Watching them light up during field research trips, encouraging their questions and ideas, I felt Grandpa's influence coming full circle. I was becoming for them what he had been for me, a believer in their potential, an appreciator of their unique perspectives. The most unexpected encounter came 6 months to the day after the will reading. I was hosting a community open house at the Foundation headquarters when I spotted my parents across the lawn. They weren't scheduled to be there, their community service hours were normally on Wednesdays, and this was Saturday. They stood awkwardly at the periphery, my father examining the solar array with professional curiosity, my mother clutching her handbag like a shield. When they saw me notice them, my father gave a stiff nod. My mother attempted a smile that didn't quite succeed. I walked over, unsure what to expect. "The facility looks impressive," my father said formally. "Very professional operation." "Thank you," I replied. "We're particularly proud of the wetlands reconstruction. It's already showing improved water quality." My mother glanced around at the other attendees. "Your grandfather would have approved," she said finally. "He always did prefer practical applications to theory." Coming from her, this was practically effusive praise. I noticed she was wearing the simple pearl earrings Grandpa had given her for her 21st birthday. Jewelry she had previously dismissed as too plain. "Would you like a tour?" I offered. They stayed for almost an hour, asking occasional questions, maintaining careful politeness. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation exactly, but it was acknowledgement of the Foundation, of my work, of a reality beyond appearances. As they were leaving, my mother paused. "Your sister mentioned you found Maxwell's journal." I was wondering. She stopped, seemingly unable to formulate her request. "There are some entries about you," I said, understanding what she couldn't ask. "From when you were young, happy memories. I could share copies if you'd like." Something flickered across her face, regret, perhaps, or longing. "I would, thank you." That evening, I sat in Grandpa's study, my study now, reading the journal he had left specifically for after the dust settles. Unlike the evidence and letters that had driven the revelations, this was simply his private thoughts, observations about life and family spanning decades. One entry, dated shortly after he discovered the truth about Riley Innovations, caught my heart. *, "The hardest lesson of my life has been learning that we can love people deeply and still not truly know them. Elizabeth was the light of my life from the moment she was born. Yet somewhere along the way, she became someone I don't recognize. Do we fail as parents when our children choose values so different from our own? Or is it simply the price of allowing them to be individuals? I cannot change their choices now. But perhaps I can still teach my granddaughters the value of integrity, especially Mandy, who sees the world with such clear eyes. Tears blurred my vision as I traced his handwriting with my fingertip. Even in his profound disappointment, he had been thinking of teaching, of growth, of future possibilities. The final page contained what I now considered my life manifesto, written in Grandpa's bold script, *, the greatest inheritance isn't money or property or even education. It's the clarity to see truth and the courage to stand for it. Everything else is just details. *, I closed the journal and walked out to the dock as the sun set over the lake. A fish jumped, creating ripples that spread in ever-widening circles. One small movement affecting everything around it, just like truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. *, community garden meeting went well. Mom actually participated. Small steps. *, I smiled and typed back, * progress, not perfection. Dinner Sunday. * looking out over the water, turned golden by the setting sun, I felt Grandpa's presence more strongly than ever. The inheritance he had truly left wasn't the money or the property or even the foundation. It was this, the freedom that comes from living authentically, from recognizing that our worth isn't measured in dollars or appearances, but in the courage to see clearly and act with integrity. The greatest wealth, I had learned, was the ability to build a life that reflected my true values, not someone else's expectations. And that, I realized, was a legacy worth protecting.